It seems really strange to think of her as being a little girl so many years ago in the late 1920s, when trams and horse and buggy were still commonplace in Sydney, when electric trains were just being introduced over there, and just a few cars were starting to grace the roads. She would have lived through the years of the Great Depression as a young girl, and then World War II as a teenager. No doubt, like most girls, she had her dreams and her loves right through those years. Mum must have seen so many changes in the world around her through her life. She lived through the space age, and then with the massive increase in technology, through the digital age. Huge changes in her lifetime. In the past, we haven't thought a lot about all the changes and the things our mum saw in her lifetime. We haven't really reflected until now on who mum has been in the past, the person she was. To us, she was just mum, and she was always there for us. Today, we will remember her in love, her life from start to finish. We're very glad that we knew her. She was a wonderful mum and a very special person. All right, so I'd just like to sort of start proceedings. That introduces it a little bit. Let's just have a prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we do praise you and thank you today for Mum's life, for my brother and I, and quite a few of those here, my children, grandchildren. Well, we wouldn't be here without my mum. And Lord, we ask that you are here and you just help us to honour her life, to honour the person she was. She was a quiet person, but very special to us. So I pray that everything will go to plan today, that we won't have any hindrances from weather, and pray that just everything will run smoothly for those who have will get up to speak. So bless us each one, and may we indeed bring honour to our mum. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so now we are going to have the hymn Amazing Grace. And we've got a PowerPoint. Yes? It's amazing how you think of things at the last minute. It is in your sheets. That is probably, for most of us here, the easiest way. Thank you, Kylie.
Sweet the sound.
David, I'll get you to stand under the microphone is up there on the...
Is this working? Yes. Well, welcome everyone. We're here today to mourn my mother, but on a more positive note, we're here to celebrate her life. So first of all, thank you to everyone for coming along, and for those people those relatives that are online. I haven't met you or seen you for such a long time. It would be nice to have a live stream from you as well. Excuse me if I'm a bit random. I haven't really prepared anything formal, although I've got some notes, so I might go a bit all over the place. Carol gave a little inkling into my mum's life. I'm sure she'll probably, in her speech, going to give a much more detailed account and correct all my errors. So I'll just do a sort of a helicopter view and then get into some other detail. So my mum was born in 1925 in Hurstville in Sydney, in Australia. Long time ago. Both her parents died when she was relatively young, very young, so her and her brothers and sisters were without parents and they had a pretty tough upbringing. We don't know much about Mum's early days. Again, Carol probably will elaborate. Dad was born 4 years later, far away in England. And then fast forward to the 1950s. They met in New Zealand. Dad came out on one of those ships and my mum came over, I'm not exactly sure for what reason. And they met and got married in 1959. And they were married for 51 years before my dad had a stroke in 2010 and passed away. So my mum coped for a little while just around the corner at her house, Littleton Avenue. Lived with Nerily, I think, for a while even. And then moved to, I was overseas at the time, so she moved down to Carol's place for a little while and then ended up in a home because of the dementia, which was pretty frightening for everyone and a horrible thing to have. So she spent the last 8 years from 2014 in the home in Oamaru. And although she was quite agitated when she went in, that's what comes with dementia, she seemed to find peace there and she was happy in the end, and they really took great care of her. After seeing what some of the homes were like when my dad went into a home briefly, I think it was really great to see what they did for Mum down there. So my mum and dad both came from a generation that was the old school, if you like. So might be frowned upon today, but my mother was a typical stereotype of a wife in those days, sort of cook, clean, and look after the family. So that's sort of frowned upon today, but it wasn't really like that because my dad also did a lot of the cooking. He was a good cook, and he worked hard. So it was a fairly equal relationship. Stereotypes don't really matter. My mum was sort of content with what she had and never complained. I do, however, remember her fabulous baking of sweet stuff, of things like coconut dreams and custard squares and ginger crunch and things like that. We were always well fed and clothed and got treats, etc. A few sort of random comments and memories. Mum's sister Eileen lived next door for the whole time that they were there, and they spent endless hours chatting in one or the other's house all morning with a cup of tea. And of course, me being at school and that, or at home when I was really young, they were just there all the time chatting away. So I think that was really good for Mum because she never had most of her family over here. They were all in Australia, so the two of them were really close. She had this obsession with cats. We always had cats in the family, or a cat. Why not? Mum and Dad used to go for walks all the time. Daily evening walk, winter, summer, rain, shine, hot, cold, and right up until they were very old, or got older, and they'd walk really fast. So, they kept healthy. Mum used to go to church with us as well, the Catholic church, diligently every Sunday morning. Dad was not religious, and so he would, when Eileen's husband Frank didn't take us, because he would go as well, Dad would drop us off, sit in the car through the whole church service, and wait for us and then take us home. If he wasn't doing that, he'd be at home cooking breakfast for us and waiting for us to get home. Flick the page. Mum never really travelled much, even to her homeland in Australia. We lived in Perth for 6 months. I think it was 1968. So I can't really remember that. And she went back 2 or 3 times only, just short trips here and there. I did entice her and Dad up to Europe when I was living in Paris. I'll come back to that in a minute. Mum never worked, as far as I can remember. She obviously worked beforehand, but I think she was a typist or a secretary or something back in the day. But I can never remember her working. She was just always dedicated to looking after us. She was strong, mentally tough. She was quite fragile and skinny in her later years, but boy, she was tough. She never really showed emotion or anger or affection. She was stubborn, like Carol. And Carol's very competitive, so she'll say something about that when she gets up. So Mum was very dedicated to the family. Mum and Dad, they both supported us in everything, whether at school or sport or education. Very proud of us. Mum was very proud of her family as well. Carol and I never met any of our grandparents. As I mentioned, Mum's parents died quite young. Dad's father got killed in World War II by a bomb, and his mother lived to a healthy age in the 70s, but because she was in the UK, we never actually saw her. So all our relatives were overseas, and so we never had big family gatherings, limited communication, pre-internet. So, I didn't know any of my relatives really, and Carol the same. So Mum was very proud of her family, her brothers and sisters, Eileen, Thelma, Jack and Ray. And of course with the dementia, which is a horrible thing, she lost her short-term memory, so she didn't talk about current stuff. And for the last eight years, she constantly mentioned Jack and Ray and Thelma and Eileen, and they're about the only things that were sort of relevant to the conversation that we could follow. We weren't sure of how with it she was. There were times when she kind of gave an inkling that she was still okay. Did she recognize us? I don't know. She never mentioned my name in the last 8 years that she was in the home to me. I think she might have mentioned Carol once or twice, but so her memory was back in the day. So she was still thinking about her family. Of course, she was very proud of her brother Ray, who was a famous cricketer. And I remember she went over for his funeral in Brisbane back in the day. And when she came back, one of the things she said was that Don Bradman, who's an even more famous Australian cricketer, came up to her and sort of said, "Hi, Margaret, how you been?" And they hadn't seen each other for like 40 or 50 years or something. And so, I think that just shows the sort of the depth of the history that we don't know that much about, but kind of it's quite striking. Having Ray Limmore, the cricketer in the family, it was a bit like having an All Black in the family, but in a different era. So, at the end of the day, very modest and not famous, and just normal family. They lived around the corner at Littleton Avenue, number 10. Anyone who's going out to the burial site, maybe you should go for a drive-by. It's still there, the same as it always was. We sold it a year ago. That was quite a nostalgic moment. Dad built that house with his friends and a couple of builder friends, or as far as I know. And it was a rock-solid house, a bit cold at times, but there was a lot of happy memories there. They would be proud that they would be shocked at the value of a house these days, because for them it was just their house. But they would be really delighted that it sort of helped Carol and I set up a platform for the future, I suppose. So it's an end of an era. Mum and Dad are both gone. So I'm remembering Dad today as well. They'll be buried side by side. A couple of silly memories. Mum and Dad's 40th wedding anniversary. My Mum and Dad were living at Littleton Avenue, and we organised a chauffeur-driven car to take them out to somewhere in Kumeu or West Auckland to go to a winery for lunch. And the chauffeur driver, he knocked on the door. We just let Mum answer the door. About 5 minutes later, Mum comes walking down the hallway and sort of says, with a green face, "I've won a car." She thought she'd won a car, but no. And then another memory, I mentioned Mum and Dad went up to Europe, which was great. It was in the 1990s, I think, so a long time ago. Which was great because Mum managed to meet Dad's side of the family. And when Mum and Dad came over to Paris, it was a bit weird seeing them walk through. I was living in Paris at the time. It was a bit weird seeing Mum and Dad walk through the gates at Charles de Gaulle Airport. It seemed out of place because they never were anywhere else except Littleton Avenue. And they stayed at my place in Paris, but one of the best ways to see Paris is to walk around because it's a relatively small city. Of course, they're in their late 60s and early 70s, but I think I just about walked them off their feet in 2 days. And one of the things about Paris is that they're not particularly famous for their public toilets. And at some stage, Mum wanted to go to the toilet, which is normal. So I knew how it worked over there. And a bit like today, you can't just go into a cafe and go to a toilet either because you have to buy something. And they get really annoyed when you do that. So anyway, I knew the cafe that we were at, and I kind of just said, "Mum, go down the stairs, down there, it's down there," because the toilets used to be sort of down in the dungeons in Paris. And I dealt with the waiter and sorted him out. And Mum comes back up, and the other thing about Paris toilets, they're not the cleanest in the world either. So Mum was sort of just, again, she was green in the face, kind of going, "Oh my God, that's the worst toilet I've ever been in." And all she kept talking about for the rest of the trip was the Paris toilets rather than the highlights of the monuments of Paris and the history and the culture. And I think that was sort of her memory of Paris. The last week or so, we've had the Jubilee celebrations, 70th Jubilee celebrations for the Queen. The Queen was the same age as my mother. So every time over the years and more recently that I've seen sort of black and white footage of the Queen, it does make me think, has made me think of what Mum was doing at that time, because we don't have videos or things that can make us recall and see what actually happened. So, of course, the Queen is fabulous and had a fantastic life, very privileged, but I suppose all I can say is that Mum's a real Queen, and God save the Queen. In summary, Mum and Dad came from a generation that was a difficult upbringing, very conservative, very simple lives, very simple values, model parents. They always gave us everything we wanted and needed and more. They never had a lot of wealth, but we still got everything, the treats and things. And we probably didn't recognize that or didn't understand how much of a challenge that was. So good on them. And now they'll be together again to be buried side by side, never to be forgotten. Thank you, Mum. Thank you, Dad. Love you both. Positive note, life is beautiful. Make the most of it. Enjoy it while you can. You're all going to get older, but, just make the most of every moment. So thank you all for coming again. Thank you all for coming, and come to the, have a few snacks afterwards. And for those that come to the burial, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Right, David and I haven't collaborated, but we have certainly crossed over a few common points there, so you might hear a few of them a bit again. You're right, some of those things weren't quite accurate. You were in Paris with them in the 1982, thereabouts. I'm sure. It wasn't the 1990s. It was before my children. Never mind. Okay. So, as David said, Mum was born a few days before Christmas in the summer of 1925 in Sydney, Australia. She was the youngest of 5 children, born to Arthur and Catherine Lindwall, And yes, Mum was only 3.5 years old when her mum died. Her mum Catherine passed away, and her dad Arthur would die when she was just 13. So, and that was not long before the Great Depression. So, as a consequence, Mum was brought up by her siblings, and as you could probably understand, they were really difficult times for the Lindwall children. So Eileen, the eldest at 23, also Jack, the eldest son at age 19, went out to work, while Thelma kept house, and Ray and Margaret went to school. So I had an Uncle Ray, and my dad was also Ray. I understand that the family lived in a small 2-bedroom house in Hurstville, and the 2 boys shared one room, and the 3 girls shared the other room. And there were a few months there that 2 of their girl cousins, and I know one was called Beryl, and I have an idea the other was Gertie, but I could be, Margaret might be able to help me on that one. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, they lived with the family, and Mum told us that the girls somehow all fitted in the bed, one large double bed. So there were 5 girls at that time, sleeping in the large double bed. Now, Jack and Ray were very good at sports. They both played for the St George's Rugby League team. And those of you who know me well know that I'm an avid Rugby League follower, as well as cricket follower. But with respect to the St George League Club, I really love the story that after their dad died, the St George's League Club held a memorial match specifically for the Lindwall family. And as a result, they gifted them many thousands of pounds, which is quite incredible. This was just before the Great Depression. So no doubt it was an absolute lifesaver for the family, and it helped them to cope through those times. So that was pretty special, I think. Mum was always very close to her siblings, and probably because of those early circumstances that bound them together from her early life. And as David said, she was particularly proud of her brother Ray. He was an amazing athlete in all departments, really. He could have gone on to play for Australia at rugby league, but he chose to go on with cricket, and he became renowned as one of the world's best ever fast bowlers. And he was a very humble man. Mum was a diligent student. She did well academically at school. She was often given the job of reading to the younger ones because she was particularly good at this. She told us also she was good at French. And it's interesting how genetics work there, because my brother here is fluent at French, and he's currently doing a degree in it. He also speaks Spanish. Kylie, my youngest daughter, is currently doing finishing a degree in music as well as French, as majors. And I'm doing my best to learn a bit of it myself, with the intention I want to be fluent as well. So learning languages seems to be in our blood. My mum was also a good runner, and she won many a race in her youth. She must have been a bit of a tomboy really in her youth. As David said, we don't know a lot about her childhood, but I know she used to play with the boys all the time. Lots of stories of her playing backyard cricket with her brothers and all the boys of the neighbourhood. They all came there. And she always has been a very competitive person. Even in her latter years in the rest home, if they were playing ball or balloon games or anything else, she liked to do well, and she preferably liked to win, always. So one by one, Mum's siblings left home. They married, most left the Sydney area. Mum didn't enjoy being on her own in the house, and she decided around about 1957, I think, to move to Auckland, New Zealand, where her oldest sister Eileen now lived with her husband Frank. It was through Frank and his affiliation to the North Shore Soccer Club that my mum Margaret and my dad Ray met. My dad, being English, loved his soccer, or football as he called it. So Mum and Dad went to a few dances together, and eventually they decided to get married. Dad's love of sport even affected their wedding day. Couldn't help it. A close look at their wedding invitation, which I think we've got included in the slideshow today, shows that there's a handwritten amendment to the date of the wedding. And they put the date back by a week because Dad's football team was playing in the major cup, in the cup final that week. So, hey, wedding went on hold and they had it a week later. So after that, first myself and then David came along over the next few years. And as David said, with the arrival of children, Mum never went back to her typist come office work. We never knew her working. She settled in to be a full-time mother, which was a real blessing to us, seriously. It was lovely to have a mother always at home. Now, Mum was a quiet, calm, reserved person who preferred to stay in the background, and yet she had a strength and a hidden resilience when needed. I realised only in the latter years that she actually was quite a stubborn person, and I will put it that David is stubborn. Since he pointed me out, we are both stubborn. That's a family trait, absolutely. And we inherited it from our dad too. I mean, we had no hope in that one. To illustrate Mum's quiet resilience and cool head, I'm reminded of an incident that happened when I was about 4 and my brother was a young baby. Mum had put a single mattress, which she'd balanced well, on its side in front of a standing heater to dry. And David was just a tiny baby. He was lying on a sheepskin and happily kicking around and punching the air as babies do. It's a bit hard to see him that way these days. And I was playing quietly nearby. I have no idea how it happened, no idea at all, because we were nowhere near it, but all of a sudden the mattress keeled over onto the heater and it quickly caught fire. I ran to Mum, she was in the bedroom, and I told her that the mattress was on fire. And she immediately ran to the lounge, she grabbed the burning mattress, and somehow she dragged and semi-lifted this thing. You know, she was only a petite lady. Somehow she dragged it through the lounge, through the kitchen, down the 10 or so relatively narrow stairs from the back of Littleton Avenue, for those who've been there, a few of you have. And she got it all the way to the bottom of our long backyard, and somehow she managed to lift that mattress and coerce it into the 44-gallon drum, where it successfully managed to smoulder for the rest of the afternoon. So there was no panic, there was plenty of determination, and there was a lot of strength to do what she had to do. She was very much up to that challenge. So my mum and dad and Auntie Eileen and Uncle Frank actually settled in Forest Hill right next to each other in the early 1960s. I'd love to think Dad built our home, but no, that didn't happen. It was built for them. Both houses were built at the same time. Eileen and Mum were certainly very best friends, always. And most weekdays, they actually had a few wines together. You've forgotten that. There was the cups of tea, yes, but there were, in the afternoons, there were wines. Not that they drank very much, just one. But they certainly enjoyed their time and their chats together for an hour or more, or two, yeah. And their other sister, Thelma, and her husband, Ernie, they seemed to alternate between living in Queensland, Australia, and in Auckland, because I remember them living in Milford and a few years later in Bayswater, and then later on in Devonport for a few years on 3 completely different occasions. All the sisters loved their time together. Their 2 brothers, Jack and Ray, lived and raised their families in Sydney and Brisbane, respectively. But again, they always loved to spend time with their sisters when that opportunity arose. Mum loved bright flowers and bright colours, so we've tried to put a little bit of colour in things today. And every year she would receive a huge, glorious, colourful bouquet of flowers for her birthday from her brother, who was a florist, from her brother Ray. He never forgot. So what things did Mum enjoy most? David's covered some of them. She loved spending time with her family, and particularly loved her grandchildren. When family visited her and Dad, or when they came to visit us, Her eyes would just light up and her face would break into a lovely smile. She loved to walk in the evenings with Dad, and in particular, they both enjoyed walking along Milford Beach together. It's interesting again, the connections are there because myself and my children also very much enjoy walking along Milford Beach on a nice day whenever we get that opportunity. Mum was a great walker, this will be reinforced, and well into her 80s she could maintain a fast pace as she strode out, a pace that many much younger people would struggle with. Let alone maintain. Our neighbours, especially when she got down to our place, Mum had rug up big time, and they thought it was a teenager walking out there. They couldn't see beyond all the bulk. So I only learned in recent years that Mum loved to dance, and I'm surprised David didn't mention that one. I cannot remember her and Dad going out to dance as much. In fact, I feel a wee bit sad about that when she enjoyed it so much. But David loves dancing, and it was he who made me aware not so long ago that Mum really loved it. I really didn't know. And you might notice a slide or two of David and Mum dancing together on the slideshow. There we go, David, they're good pictures, don't worry. And there was a look of pure enjoyment and happiness on her face. She really did enjoy it. She loved easy listening music. She often sang as she worked around the house. For the most part, she didn't know the words, but that never stopped her. She would improvise with words of her own. She and Dad also loved to go watch some of the live stage shows in Auckland, like Phantom of the Opera and others that David quite often bought them tickets for that, and they loved it. And another lifetime love of Mum was cats. She absolutely adored cats, even though too much exposure to them gave her hay fever, but she loved them anyway. Our cats were always very much loved by Mum and Dad and myself. David, not quite so much. Needless to say, I love cats, and my children do too. It's amazing how things come down. Mum and Dad kept good health for much of their lifetime. However, as happens in the twilight years, things started to unravel for both of them. Dad's mind was affected by a stroke, which brought an increasing dementia as he approached 80. After a brief stint in hospital, his dementia made it impossible to remain at home. So he unfortunately had to go to a dementia home, which wasn't a very nice one. Mum wasn't coping very well, mainly on her own at home. By this time, David was living and working in Paris, as he said. I'd remarried the previous year and I was down in the South Island. It was a little hard to control things up here in the North Island. And in the end, when Mum was just not coping, we reluctantly left Dad in the home in Auckland rather than get him somehow down there. We relocated Mum to our home near Waimate in the South Island. And Dad, in fact, passed away just 6 weeks later after we last visited him. And so Mum ended up living with us for 4 years until her gradually increasing dementia required 24-hour care, and we just couldn't do that. We just couldn't manage it anymore. But we found an amazing dementia home down there in Oamaru, not too far from where we live. And the ladies have loved and they have cared for her as if she were family. We cannot speak highly enough of that particular rest home. It is amazing. And they've said to us, hey, you can pop in any time if you want to. You're always part of the South Hanger family. They're special ladies that work there, I assure you. And Mum lived there for the last 8+ years of her life. So Mum's final years were really hard for her. Her eyesight was very poor, so she couldn't read or watch TV or even see faces clearly. If that weren't enough, she was virtually deaf the last few years, so she couldn't have conversations with others or communicate her wishes very easily at all. Mum was amazing that she could get around though, in spite of her sight difficulties, etc. She could see out the peripheral vision, and that helped her, but then she had a broken hip about 3 years ago that took away her ability to walk. I mean, life was getting harder and harder, unfortunately. It was very sad to watch. Her dementia mostly robbed her of her, any normal speech. But once in a while, she would have a day where she would admit to me that she was very lonely, but that she loved me coming to visit her. She knew me just for a day here and there. So even though most of the time she didn't know me, those very rare days were really special to me. Despite all these terrible handicaps, Mum was usually quiet and cooperative and happy. You would think, you'd think that she could be quite upset, but she wasn't. She was singing rhyming songs, we might hear a bit more about that, and living in her own made-up world. She could have also been feisty sometimes. She was feisty sometimes. And she let the caregivers know that she was unhappy with what they were doing with her. She had her ways of telling her. So my mum actually tested positive for COVID about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And the caregivers were simply amazed, actually, that she just sailed through it. She had a slightly dribbly nose. She didn't even appear to be sick. She just took it at a stride. She coped with it better than any of the other 20 residents there or the 7 staff. They all caught it. Mum did better. Even the doctor had to be reminded not to forget that she had it in dealing with her. But as he said, he wasn't surprised that Margaret coped admirably with it because she kept excellent health, and generally she rarely picked up anything that was going through the home. I was really proud of Mum. Unfortunately, it really was a serious mouth infection a week or so after she got over COVID. That was really where things started to fall off the cogs, and basically she didn't last a lot longer. So the last of the Linmore children is today to be laid to rest. She was the youngest, she's the last to go. I want to mention just a bit about faith for a few minutes. The Bible tells me that death is like a sleep. Those who are asleep or have passed away know nothing. It also says that there's a day coming when our Creator God, Jesus, is going to return to this earth and wake all those who have passed to their rest believing in Him. And along with believers living on the earth, they will all go to heaven. Those who've rejected Him will die. Mum was born into a Catholic family and seemed to have a very simple faith. As David said, she attended church most weeks where she could through her life, and even when dementia blurred her cognizant abilities, she often spoke of wanting to go to church. Jesus said if we have the faith of a child, we will get to heaven. I believe I will see my mum again one day, happy, healthy, and youthful, full of vigour, and I really look forward to that day. For the time being, I say vale and a biento. Farewell and see you soon. Thanks so much for being the very best mum. Stephanie.
Will it stay? Good afternoon, everybody. Most of you know me as Stephanie. If you don't, I am one of Nana's grandchildren. I was thinking about this tribute earlier in the week, and I realized I was really looking forward to it. When we were kids, Nana was quite quiet and reserved, so many of my memories with her involve us kids playing together outside, or Mum was catching up with Nana and Papa. As I got older and learned better how to connect with people, Nana started showing more and more signs of dementia, and her hearing and vision started to go. So I never quite felt like I connected with her as I wish I could have. As a result, this little tribute today to remember my gentle, giving, and funny Nana is quite precious to me, because it feels like perhaps the first time that I can do something really meaningful. Just for her. I always enjoyed going to Nana and Papa's growing up. It was a space where I could relax and read or play to my heart's content. Of course, I realize now that was because Nana and Papa didn't make us do any chores, so they were busy working hard in the background. We were properly spoiled, running around or reading, playing cricket outside, while trying not to smack the ball into Papa's greenhouse, until we'd get called inside for a meal. Either that, or Nana would come over to us with apples, cut into quarters for afternoon tea. And to this day, apples always taste better sliced. They don't taste the same whole. Nana taught me that. Speaking of apples, no dessert can possibly beat Nana's apple sponge, and I would have that any day over cake or any other dessert. It's just spectacular. Nana and Papa were very peaceful people who worked well alongside each other and loved each other quietly. I went and stayed, first with Nana and then with Papa, for a period of 5 weeks when I was 16, as their dementia was worsening. Over those weeks, they had to take turns staying in the hospital for different reasons. And while both of them were quite reserved, the first time Papa and I walked to North Shore Hospital from Littleton Ave to go and visit Nana, he was so set on seeing her that I popped into the dairy, and by the time I came out, I could barely see him. He was a speck down the road. By the time we got there, and Papa saw Nana, all he could do was hold her hand and cry, which was the first I'd really seen the evidence of the deep love they had for each other, and it was beautiful. Then they swapped places a couple weeks later. Nana came home, and Papa had to go into the hospital. I found a note in my journal the other day about how obvious it was that Nana was missing Papa. One night, I asked her if she would like a back massage. It's a thing in our family. And she told me she didn't think she'd ever had one before. So even though she was never particularly touchy-feely, Nana let me give her a back massage. And if humans can purr like a cat, she did. She made all of the sounds. She loved it. Later on, Nana moved south to live with Mum and Neil, and I didn't get to see her very much. Her dementia was bad, but she still enjoyed things in life. For example, Nana might balk and make a face at large dinner portions, but she definitely stored an extra stomach for dessert. Her eyes would light up at the sight of a bowl of pudding or a slice of cake. She also loved talking to the cats and horses surrounding the property, and definitely still retained her sense of humour. I may have struggled knowing how to talk with her, but I certainly enjoyed the sound of her laughter. She also loved flowers. And as Mum said, bright colours, so this scarf is entirely for her. And she particularly loved being made a fuss of by the family. For example, on her birthday. Didn't need to be anything flash, but centre of attention with some lovely flowers and some cake, and she was top of the world. So Nana was a quiet person. But she made life better for those around her just by being herself. She is well loved and missed. And I look forward to getting to know her better. One moment. I love you, Nana, and I'll see you one day when I also head home to God. Thank you.
Hello. This will be probably a bit of a shorter speech to some of the others, but I'll go through what I've thought about the last few days and the last week. So when I think of Nana, I think of someone who's quite subtle. Everyone's talked about how she was a quiet person, and she was quiet, but she was also very strong, and she wasn't afraid to say something that was on her mind. She was also, you could say, quietly confident. She was who she was, and that was okay. And one thing that I really want to highlight about Nana, and something that sticks out in my mind so strongly when I think about a trait, and Uncle David did mention it briefly, but I never once in my whole entire life saw her angry. I hardly even saw her upset. And I think that's worth highlighting. Also, the other thing I would have to talk about here, and I'll bring up a bit later as well, but loyalty. You know, to marry someone and to live with someone for 50 years is incredibly rare. And I think loyalty describes her to a T as well. So some of the memories that I were going to talk about have already been touched on. So I won't go into too much detail, but the 40th wedding anniversary was one that I was going to mention. And so obviously the limo was arranged and by Dad and Uncle David, and it turned up, all big surprise. And my memory of it was that Nana come out beaming that they just won the lotto. Forget the 40 years of marriage, they won the lotto. Which sticks out as my memory. But needless to say, I do remember them having a great day and really enjoying being spoilt and to celebrate 40 years of a great partnership and a great marriage. And that's the other thing that I have to talk about when I think of Nana. You can't separate Nana and Papa. They were inseparable. They're always together. They're always working together. And again, just no arguments, very peaceful, and just amazing for each other. And then I won't go too much into kind of the earlier years, because unfortunately they've either been touched on already or my memories are thin, unfortunately. But her love of walking and how fit and healthy she was for most of her life is something I will mention as well. And I do remember in the last 5 to 10 years, whenever it would go down and she was going out for her walks, as Mum said, she would just have an incredible pace. And I want to, because us kids would be going out with Mum for a walk, and Nana would be there, and she was like, poof, zoom, she'd be gone. She's faster than us, which is just quite incredible. But I'll just conclude by saying that she was an amazing person. I loved her very much, and also she, again, just her quiet strength and also her loyalty, and just the great person that she was. So goodbye, Nana, and I love you.
Hi. This is normal. They always tell me to speak up. I just want to start by saying that it's been quite special. Excuse me. quite special getting to hear all about Nana, just because I'm the youngest, for those that don't know me. And so, I'm so sorry. And so I feel like I missed out on a lot in getting to know Nana. But there are still obviously memories that I do have. And one of those is her apple sponge. I have very specific memories of all of us kids sitting down at the table with the old placemats, and I think we used to bang our cutlery on the placemats while we were waiting for Nana and Papa to get everything ready. And then we were just so excited for that apple sponge. It was the highlight every time, I think, for all of us. So yeah, that's definitely earned a space in my long-term memory. I remember her being very gentle, like Steph and Jaren have already said. And I remember how happy she used to be with her family around her. Like Steph was talking a bit about, us kids kind of did keep to ourselves a bit. But I still remember her presence, and it was always very gentle and just content to have everybody around her. She was an early riser, I remember that too, and a lover of cats. And I also do remember her being a bit of a worrying soul. I think all of those things she's passed on to me, except the early rising. But yeah, it's nice to see how her legacy has continued. I remember it was comforting for me to hear Nana and Papa getting up early in the morning and get the breakfast ready before any of us kids were even thinking of getting up. And I remember how organized all the meals were. I mean, they grew up in a different generation, so everything was set out properly. And I just remember also the comfort of her soft laughter as all of us children and the grandchildren got into mischief or just cracking jokes. I wish I had been old enough at that time to understand how important it is to get to know people while you can. But I'm still very grateful to have the memories that I do. So after Papa passed away, Nana moved to the South Island, where I was living with Mum and Neil, because of her struggles with dementia. So I was fortunate to experience 4 years with Nana in my home, and we had many more laughs. While Nana did find it difficult to hear me because I'm a quiet person anyway, but she was struggling with deafness. It was still special getting to know her and her quirks a little better. There were many times where she said something that I don't think she meant it to be funny, but it definitely was hilarious. And I remember she used to have some amazing facial expressions as well, which I think has also been passed on. Like she was very good at eye rolling. I do remember that. Yeah. And many of you may not know this, but Nana also was a rap artist in her latter years. I used to listen to her making up daily rhymes about apple trees, money. She'd use Tennessee and C, ecstasy, yeah. Anything that ended in E, she'd fit it into her rap, and it was just really entertaining and sweet to see her sitting in her own bubble, enjoying making up rhymes. She also had a sharp brain. I remember that she would just think of things in a way that I wouldn't even think of. For example, one of the horses that was at our place and now was at Narrowleys was named Star, and she remembered that by thinking of rats, which is the reverse of the word. Like we've already heard a bit about, she wasn't just a sharp thinker, but she was very fast walker. Yep, we would always see her zooming off in front of us in her big puffer jacket. And I remember she would often be wearing a lot of pink. So it was just this pink lady off in the distance. She liked to stop at the horses and give them a big fuss. And she would be rapping all the way down if we weren't walking beside her. She also had her priorities straight. I remember also she would be too full to finish dinner, but then whenever Neil would ask her if she wanted dessert, she would just say, "Oh, what you got?" And she'd almost always accept. She was a keen lover of music, which is just as well, as I was constantly in and out of her room where the piano was. And she always let me play it. I went through a phase of sleepwalking in my early teens, and one night I somehow made a beeline all the way to the piano room, which was her bedroom, opened up the lid of the piano, and then I woke up and realized where I was, and Nana was sitting up in bed and asking me if I was okay, and then she very sweetly patted the bed beside her, was like, "Oh, come join me, dear." But I was confused, and so I did head back upstairs, but I still remember her being instantly welcoming. Eventually, Nana did need to go into a home requiring more care. And when I did go along for a visit with Mum, even though it was almost impossible at that stage for her to hear me, she was always interested in hearing about what us kids were getting up to in our lives. And yeah, when she could hear properly, she was also still able to have some pretty normal conversations, even if she got some details confused a little bit. She still had a big personality, not being shy and expressing how she really felt about something, which did sometimes include some very grumpy faces. And while this could be amusing, I am happy that in her final years, she did usually seem content just chattering away to herself in the garden or in her chair. I may not have experienced many memories of Nana before she developed dementia, so that's why it's been so special hearing about who she was before that point. It was still really special to me to get to know her as she was during those times. I can now understand where we all got our stubbornness from, and that was in my speech. I didn't add that. The family's ability to make very interesting faces, an appetite for sweet things, and for me also an adoration of all things cats. amongst many other traits that I can see have been passed on. She was family, and I'm so grateful that I got to share that with her. I'm looking forward to the day when we can all meet together in a place where the pains of life have passed, where we can get to know each other on a deeper level to our heart's content and beyond. In the meantime, I'm thankful that she's resting peacefully.
G'day. For those who don't know me, I'm Nerily. I am the eldest grandchild. I'm just going to read out a couple of the emails and letters that we were sent in from people who couldn't be here today. So from Mari, Ray, Joanna, Erin, Mick and Abby. Says, we're so very sad to hear that your mother, Margaret, has passed away. She was so special to us and we have many happy memories of stays at Forest Hill. We shall miss her very much. I am so glad that we managed to see her back in 2017. Our sincere sympathy to you all. I'm sure that you are very busy at present, but thinking of you and sending our love. From Kerry, who is one of the amazing caregivers at South Andrew Rest Home, where Nana spent her last years. Hi Carol, I'm thinking of you and your family today. Thank you for letting us be part of your mum's journey. I'm pleased she didn't suffer and wait until you were home again. She will be missed by us. The wee rhymes coming from her when we were doing any personal cares or the sideways look when she wanted us to move along. She was a special lady for sure. I can't imagine how hard it was to be leaving her. Looks like she wanted to go with you too. She timed her leaving perfectly. Hugs to you all. From Mary and David, cousins in England. Hi Carol and Neil. David has just messaged me about your mum. We are so sorry to hear the news. At least your mum is in a happier place now. Like I said to David, you both have each other to lean on during this very sad time. Please send our love to all your family and tell them how sorry we are now the matriarch of your family has gone on to the next chapter of her life or death. None of us know what is waiting for us at the end, but believe that she has gone to be reunited with your dad. It is a lovely thought. Bless you all. We are thinking about you all. Lots of love to you all at this sad time. And one more from Eric and Ghislaine over in France. Thank you very much for having informed us of the death of your mum. After your last message, it wasn't a surprise for you, but it is still a time of sadness, even if for your mum it is an end of suffering. However, we are happy that you are able to be by her side in her last days. Now she is sleeping until the next return of Jesus. Ghislaine joins with me to offer you, David, and your family our very sincere condolences. I send you all my deep friendship and pray that God brings you all the comfort you need. Now, I just wanted to say I lived with Nana for about a year after I left home. I will say that I was, just left home. I was out doing, adventuring things as you do in your late teens, so I wasn't home very often. But Nana always made sure I had dinner on the table, whether I ate it or not. And it's the little things like that that you do look back and appreciate. And I'm very grateful that she was that sort of person. I also wanted to comment that she did love her cats. Every single one of them that I ever met was fat.
Well, we've come to the end of proceedings. It's gone a little longer than we anticipated. We're running a bit late. I just want to say one little poem. Don't think of her as gone away, just that a new phase has begun. Life holds many facets. This earth is only one. Just think of her as resting from the sorrow and the tears, in a place of quietness and of sleep, where there are neither days nor years. If she could talk, I think she'd say, "Don't cry for me. I'm at rest today." Just think of her as living in the hearts of those she touched. For nothing loved is ever lost, and she was loved so much. And on that note, as so, we are going to take the casket out, and we'll have just a very few quick eats. I'm sorry, they're pretty much ready out there, but they're sort of pushing us towards, we need to be at the burial site pretty soon. So hopefully you can stay and have a very quick eats with us, and yes, we need to sort of move on. So these ladies are coming in, and we'll need the pallbearers, I think.
I am the bread of life. You who come to me shall not hunger, and who believe in me shall not thirst. No one can come to me unless the Father beckons, and I will raise you up, and I will raise you up, and I will raise you up on the last day. The bread that I will give is my flesh for the life of the world, and if you eat